In today's video, I'm going to get a bit more technical, even for some healthcare providers. However, I will try to make things as simple as possible, and I promise you that by the end of the video, even someone who never looked at a piece of tissue under the microscope will still have a pretty good idea what I'm going to talk about. Now let me remind you that in my last video, I briefly mentioned about how long the WHO recommends the biopsy should be. That 1.5 centimeters or longer guideline is good for the person that collects the biopsy. However, that is not enough. The biopsy needs to look adequate under the microscope as well. And here's what the WHO has to say about it. At the same page 17, the WHO also stipulates that the biopsy has to contain at least 10 intertrabecular spaces of bone marrow under the microscope. So here is where things start to get technical. So what is an intertrabecular space after all? To answer that question, we need to go over the basic histology of the bone marrow. Now, no worries, I'll make things very simple. This is an image you are already familiar with. I chose this particular image simply because this is how every single bone marrow biopsy should look like under the microscope. So let's go with describing this image. Those pink ribbons that I highlighted in blue are actually pieces of bone, or what they are called bony trabeculae. And whatever is in between them is the space, the intertrabecular space. So there you have it. I have, in this case, 3 intertrabecular spaces highlighted. Obviously there are more here, but I did only 3 to illustrate what an intertrabecular space is. The intertrabecular spaces in turn contain 2 basic elements. The fat, which in this case is represented by those white circles, and everything else is bone marrow. Now that we are all familiar with how a bone marrow biopsy should look like, let's go on and see how bad bone marrow biopsies look like. One of the worst situations is that there is no bone marrow at all. And in this image, we have just blood clot. And in the right lower corner, I just put again the image of how a good bone marrow biopsy should look like for comparison purposes. Another equally bad situation is when we receive in the lab simply just cord or the cortex without bone marrow. And again, in the right lower corner, you can see for comparison how a good biopsy should look like. The prior 2 situations don't happen that often, but this one, the one that is in this current image, which is called aspiration artifact, happens quite a lot. So what you see is basically the bone marrow being completely replaced by blood, which has been aspirated into the biopsy prior to taking the biopsy. In a following video, I'm going to talk about how to avoid this particular artifact. Another situation that happens quite often, unfortunately, is what you can see in this image. So this is called crush artifact. So the only thing that is left is the bony trabeculae, and the bone marrow has been squeezed out by a poor technique or a poor instrument. So just remember, as I shown in a prior video, whether you got as an operator, you got a very good biopsy in terms of its length, that is not enough. The biopsy has to look good under the microscope as well. In future videos, I'm going to talk about how to avoid all these common artifacts. And until then, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Give me a thumbs up, obviously, if you liked it. And good luck with your biopsy if you're a healthcare provider, and especially if you're a patient.